Good afternoon. Now you should be able to hear me. All right, so it is Monday. The sun has been shining this morning. We've warmed nicely. Let me see what the temperature is outside here at the house. It says it's 71.2 degrees right now. So we'll certainly take that, right? Um, we're going to talk about fronts today in our Weather Academy, and stick with us because as we head in towards the end of this today, Tracy Hinson went out with some of her critters. You know, she has like a little farm almost, but she's out and she's showing us some of the things that the animals are going through right now with its being spring and the warmer weather coming and how they're kind of prepping for that. So we got a bonus little segment coming up at the end of this today for that. So I think you'll really like that. We're going to talk about fronts today. Last week we talked about air masses, and so this week we're talking about fronts. And I think I've got this all worked out, but it went away. No, it's back. All right, maybe it's back. It is. Yay! All right. Whew. Sometimes it scares me the way these things work. All right, so we're talking about fronts today. So, what is a front? We get a lot of weather because of fronts. A front is a boundary between different types of air masses. Okay, so last week we talked about those air masses, and we're going to review them here in just a minute. So, what is an air mass? It's a large body of air whose properties of temperature and humidity are fairly similar in any given direction and altitude. So, it basically, sometimes it's warm and humid, sometimes it's cold and dry. And, that boundary between the two air masses is often what brings us a change in the weather. So that's what we're doing today. We're talking about the fronts. So we talked about air masses last week and just kind of reviewing where they form and where they are and what kinds there are. There's really 5 different air masses, and it's all about humidity and temperature. So if it's humid, we call it a maritime air mass because that's a little m, because it's over water, it's getting its moisture from the water. So it usually forms over the oceans or the Gulf of Mexico. If it's forming over land, we say that's continental source. So it's a continental, it gets a little C. Now, you can have 3 types of continental air masses. If it's over the Arctic and it's really cold air, that's when we say it's continental Arctic. Most of the time, we don't get that, fortunately. But we do get the continental polar, which is cold. That's what comes out of Canada all the time. And there's something called continental tropical, which over the desert southwest, the air is very dry, but it's also very hot and very warm. So it's still tropical because it's warm, but it's dry. So we call it continental tropical. So that's kind of basically what we're talking about with fronts. It's the boundaries between all of these. So what changes when a front slides through? Well, usually there's a change in temperature. So on one side of the front, think of a front kind of as a frontal. It's a boundary. It's a war zone. It's a transition zone. We're going from a different kind of temperature and humidity to something else. And usually, when the front goes through, the wind direction changes. The cloud cover can change because most of the time ahead of a front, you do have clouds. And sometimes when that front comes through, you can have rain or snow or thunderstorms. So I thought we'd look at the weather map today. And this is this morning. And you can see there's a lot of red and blue fronts drawn on here. They're lines and they have little triangles and little pips, little half moons on them, and they point in the direction that the wind is moving. Now, there was a front that's kind of came through here yesterday. It wasn't very impressive, but that went on to our south. Now, there's one back to the west over Kansas that we'll be watching later today. So, when a storm system gets wound up, we have 3 basic types of fronts that go along with that. And they separate the cool air, which is north of a warm front, which is shown in the red here, from the warm air. on the south side of the front usually. Then we have the blue line indicates a cold front, and that separates colder air from warm air. It also, when the cold front actually catches up to the area where the warm front is, we call that a triple point, where the warm front, the occluded front, and the cold front come together. We see that occluded front develop, and that separates cool air from colder air. So you're going to see the change in humidity, you're going to see the change in temperature, the change in wind direction, and the change in cloud cover. So a cold front is drawn in blue, which is a cold weather color on the weather map. These blue barbs point in the direction the cold front is moving. So we know which way it's moving based on the way it's pointing. Those little barbs, those little triangles. And active weather, a lot of times it's thunderstorms, is usually along and ahead of the cold front. So if we kind of look at this, if we take a slice of what the cold front looks like, that slice, it's a pretty steep curve. Think of a cold front as like the snow plow pushing snow. Okay, the cold front's pushing into the air like the snow plow going down the road pushing snow. If you've ever seen the snow plow driving down the road and it's, pushing a decent amount of snow, that snow is flying high into the sky and, well, not high into the sky, but it's flying off to the road. It's pushing it almost straight up and moving it out away. So the cold front is like a snowplow in that it's really got a lot of push and that slope is really steep. So that's making the air rise. And we talked about this with low pressure. When you make the air rise, then you're talking about creating clouds and usually creating some rain. So that's where we get the active weather. So after a cold front passes, the temperatures go down. The humidity levels usually drop off because there's more moisture ahead of the cold front than behind it. And the winds are going to turn more to the west or to the north to bring that colder air in. And your air pressure is going to take a jump. Sometimes we get some gusty winds behind a cold front. You can have gusty winds ahead of a cold front too, but they're usually out of the south or southwest. And then once the front passes on a cold front, then they turn to the west or to the north. So the cold front is one of our basic fronts. The warm front is one of our basic fronts. Now, this is drawn in red on a weather map. And red is a warm color, right? See how that all fits together? So the red pips show the direction that the warm air is moving. The warm air is moving into the cooler air. And so it's pushing, in this case, towards the top of the screen. And sometimes there's rain or snow along a warm front. Now, with a warm front, it's a little bit different here. The slope, instead of like the snow plow that comes barreling through with a cold front really steep pushing it up, the slope on a warm front is much more gentle. It's spread out over a longer distance. Think of a garage broom, one of those, instead of a snow plow or a big snow shovel, think of the the garage broom just kind of pushing things along. It's not as forceful per se. Now, sometimes we do have thunderstorms with a warm front because sometimes the air that's being pushed up that slope is really warm and humid. And when that happens, yes, you can in fact get some thunderstorms up there because the air up above the front, aloft, not necessarily at the ground, it may be cool, but when the air aloft is unstable, it still can create thunderstorms. And when it happens and you're on underneath that and you're still on the cool side of the front, the thunder sounds really loud because it bounces around. It kind of gets trapped by that cooler air aloft. So temperatures rise after the warm front goes through. The humidity usually increases. The dew point goes up, which is a much better, and it's not relative humidity. If you're on the cool side of the front, you could have 100% humidity if there's fog and if there's rain. But on the south side of the front, once it goes through, it actually usually becomes more humid, even though the relative humidity goes down because the actual air temperature goes up. And we'll talk more about humidity and dew point in the future. But winds usually turn to the south as the warm front goes through. Now there's another type of basic front here, a stationary front. Now notice this is blue and red and it's alternating. You've got the blue barbs and the red pips, and stationary front's like a stationary bike. You ride a stationary bike, but you're not moving. A stationary front's usually pretty much settled and it's just sitting there. And so on the cold side, you basically have the cool air. On the warm side, underneath it, you have the warm air. So it doesn't move very much. It's a stationary front. Now, sometimes you can have active weather along this front. It's definitely a possibility that you get active weather along this front. And a lot of times, this is where we'll finally start to see an area of low pressure develop. So you'll start to see that develop. And then once the low pressure starts getting developed, then you actually end up with, uh, you know, the fronts kind of taking back to the cold front and the warm front characteristics. Now, when the cold front catches up to the warm front and starts to squish it south, that's when we have this occluded front. And that's drawn in purple, which is a combination of blue and red, right? Okay. So the purple pips and barbs point in the direction that that occluded front is moving. And usually there's active weather, most of the time good size area of storms and rain along and ahead of that front. So as we go back and look at today's weather map, we see our cold front here has come to the south of St. Louis. It transitions into a bit of a warm front here as you head back across parts of Kansas. And then there's another cold front coming from that low pressure system here back across parts of Kansas. So this is the system out here that's actually going to head our way as we head into later today. And so I thought I'd give you a picture of what that's looking like right now on the satellite picture. You can see the disturbance and the clouds right in here sliding in. There's some clouds north of St. Louis, and there's some clouds out here approaching mid-Missouri and down into the Ozarks. If I add an overlay here, I can show you what the radar looks like, perhaps. Got to get over to that. Hold on just a split second. And I can put the radar on there. And you can see there's some showers back here across parts of Kansas, spreading into Missouri, and then also to the north of St. Louis, some really light showers. And this is the area as we're heating up south of St. Louis this afternoon. We may actually have some thunderstorms. We probably will have a few showers around the St. Louis area before everything is said and done today. So that's kind of basically where we are with our fronts. There's one I didn't include for you, and that's what we call the dry line. We don't really see that often here in St. Louis, but you get it back into Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And that's separating not necessarily the temperature difference, but it separates very humid air from very dry air, and that's enough usually to force severe thunderstorms to form. And that's a lot of times what we're looking at as the focus for severe weather development as we head into the springtime and summertime. And we, of course, keep that in mind looking at that. Now, I told you to hang on because we had a really great little blurb from Tracy Hinson today. So the animals are all getting ready for spring. The warmer weather we know is coming. It's nice out today. And Tracy put together a really cool thing that I think you're going to enjoy about what the animals are doing and how they're moving around this time of year.
Spark changes for the animals all around us. Horses start shedding their winter coat in springtime. They're getting ready for summer. Grass starts growing again, and more plants bloom too. The abundance of flora for animals is equivalent to a feast for us humans. Many species depend on the springtime feast of green grass and other plants to feed their young. More food for the mamas means more milk for the babies. There's also more hours of daylight in the spring, so more diurnal animals can be out and about eating. As temperatures continue to warm up this season, you'll probably come across some scaly friends. Reptiles normally hibernate through our cold winter months, So when you're out, be on the lookout for slithering snakes. Isn't she beautiful? And slow-going turtles and tortoises. If you come across one of these guys trying to cross a busy road,
Help them out. They know where they want to go, so make sure you move them in the same direction they were heading to in the first place.
turtles and tortoises like their neighborhoods, so don't move them to a new spot. And be sure to always wash your hands after handling reptiles. If an animal isn't in danger, just enjoy them from a safe distance away. Happy springtime, everyone!
All right. Wasn't that cool? All right, Tracy, she loves her animals and she has access to all of these little animals. And so we'll have more from Tracy as time goes on. I thought that was really cool. Thanks, Tracy, for doing that for us today. And somebody just asked, where's Maple? She's out on the deck. And yes, she's making some noise out there right now. So that's our little puppy here. Uh, okay, so we talked about fronts today. That is our lesson for today, our Weather Academy for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it and had a good time. We'll post this online on our YouTube page, and you can always go back and review it. We are getting into thunderstorm season, so I think we're going to talk about thunderstorms as we head into Wednesday. Now that we've talked about air masses and fronts and high and low pressure, you kind of have the gist of the basics, some of the basics here of weather. And we're going to explore more as we talk about thunderstorms and severe weather safety as we head through the rest of this week. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're with us, and stay safe. Keep washing your hands. I know it seems like we're washing them a lot, but keep washing your hands, and we'll get through this together. Have a great afternoon, everybody.